Good morning, buongiorno, buenos dias. I'm really honored to be here. My name is Amanda Clinton, as was mentioned, and I'm currently at the American Psychological Association as their. Oh, sorry. Yes, please remind me to speak slowly. It's not my strength. At the American Psychological Association as their Senior Director for International Affairs, and I'm the founder and convener of the Global Psychology Alliance. So today I am going to talk a few minutes so that we do have space for conversation about community psychology and a role for taking action to address the climate crisis. I would like to start by saying grazie to Caterina and to all of you for including me. This has been a very, just the range of presentations, community psychology itself, a very enlightening experience. So there we go. I just wanted to start with a few images. This is a lagoon in Suesta, Colombia, approximately 2 years ago. A playground in the United Kingdom at the confluence of two rivers that flooded earlier this year. A spruce forest in the Harz region of Germany that experienced drought that resulted in insect infestation. A reservoir where bacteria is rotting due to extreme temperatures near Kyiv, Ukraine, and deforestation in the Amazon, which actually since 2019 has increased approximately 50%. So it's accelerating rather than slowing. This is my hometown. I'm from Alaska. And streams, rivers, and bays in which we used to fish when I was a child that had literally tens of thousands of salmon swimming upstream to spawn, now very often have as few as 300 or 400. Pretty much wherever we look, we see images of fires, contamination, animals suffering, extreme storms, pollution, and trash. So this isn't really a conversation to make us aware of what we already know. We understand that humanity has a problem. What I want to address specifically is the way in which psychological science informs action, the way in which we as psychologists can think more about how we interact with the rest of the world, as it were, in a transdisciplinary manner to address the climate crisis. So, photos show natural destruction. Of course, there are human stories behind each of these. And as I mentioned, I'm Alaskan. And for those of us from either northern, southern extremes, but in the equator portion of the earth as well, we're experiencing the climate crisis just in different ways. In the Yukon, so central Alaska, the terrain is frozen typically all year. So that tundra should not melt. What we're seeing is that the temperatures have been so warm, it's been so warm and so sunny, where before, we never took off our jackets kind of thing, that the wildlife is impacted, of course, the land is impacted, but that has very significant consequences, in particular for indigenous populations. This article came out in the Washington Post about a week ago, but we're all aware that Many people are losing lives in the broadest sense of the word. That the story behind this is that Yupik Eskimos, for example, are seeing so many difficulties surviving in their villages, that their language is dying out, their culture is dying out, people are being forced to leave. What happens in particular, places like Alaska, but not unique to it, is that when you take a young adult out of a village where they have lived within a particular cultural milieu their entire lives, and their options typically are relatively urbanized parts of the state, Fairbanks or Anchorage, there's no place to live. It's very hard to survive. The discrimination, the racism is fairly strong. There is a depression, physical illness, anxiety tend to be very high, and those are correlated with things like substance use and abuse. And so we're effectively looking at the end of centuries of many cultures, many languages, many histories, whatever it is that you think when you say, I'm home, to lose all of that broadly is indeed a critical human crisis. So as you know, here we are talking about community regeneration. How are we going to build bonds and construct bridges amongst people and environments so that we can collectively address the climate crisis, which of course does not affect us all in the same kind of way, depending on where we're from, what we do, our resource levels, et cetera. This is, I'm pretty sure in this audience, but actually 99% of scientists agree that the cause of climate change is largely human related. So if we look at any number of data charts, but I just want to bring this in to the psychology piece, because it's very often, I think, hard for psychologists or people who don't know psychologists but know the word psychologist to connect things like manufacturing and energy production to psychology and human behavior. So if you pay attention to the red line and compare that to the blue line, what you'll see is that human drivers are the most significant causative factor in climate change. Those are things like greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide from automobiles, airplanes that we're aware of, ozone. We have too much ozone in the form of smog at low levels of the atmosphere, and too little now because it's being depleted by things like chlorofluorocarbons and refrigerants at high levels of the atmosphere. Land cover, which I think often maybe isn't the first factor that people consider. Of course, places like the Amazon are being deforested, but agriculture and actually removal of natural environments in the interests of building homes or building up cities are also significantly impacting climate change. Aerosols are largely unused currently, but did have a significant impact. Comparatively speaking, in terms of natural drivers, volcanoes are one of the most significant natural impacts on climate. However, just to give you a sense, when you have a major volcanic eruption, it can lead to typically a temperature decrease, air contamination for maybe 2 years period of time, but that's very temporary, right? And what we have is a constant upward swing in many factors that originating from human behavior. So if we look at greenhouse gases by economic sector, electricity, heat, and in many parts of the world, air conditioning, so climate control, it contributes 25% of that, while agriculture, forestry, and land use contribute another 24%. Additionally, industry, manufacturing, all the things we buy, we wear, we use, and transportation, which very often I think comes to people's mind as the factor. We're highly focused on our cars, which isn't a bad thing, but not the thing, at about 14%. These are global numbers. So it's going to vary depending on country, right? The part of the world you're in. If we look at the top emitters, across the world, 10 of those contribute 2/3 of global emissions. And I would argue that, well, I'll just speak for the United States, there is a lot we could do if we really decided to do that. China occupies the biggest portion, followed by United States, the European Union, India, Russia, Japan, Brazil, Indonesia, Iran, and Canada. What that means in many contexts is that where there are producers, as it were, of climate problems, there are also receivers of climate problems. I work quite closely with colleagues in Nicaragua who talk a lot about the downstream effects. They add very little to the overall climate problem, but they suffer quite greatly being in an area where there are hurricanes, floods, there's already a lot of poverty, not strong infrastructure. So why community psychology? I'm sure this is obvious to everybody here, but as I contemplated the community psychology as a specialization within psychology, I think that this group of experts is particularly well poised to take action, leadership, and promote change in relation to the climate crisis, given the ways in which community psychologists see the world and study it. That I think community psychologists are amongst the best integrated or transdisciplinary, multifaceted and focused of the psychology world, because you look at individual and systems levels and that nexus between culture, economics, unique global perspectives and experiences, environment, politics, and all of that to look forward toward positive well-being, change, health, and empowerment. So I want to talk about 5 building blocks to getting a bridge that crosses a pretty big gap that we're facing in climate health. These are communicate, educate, invite and include, advocate, and associate. And I'm going to kind of mention the scientific literature and then specific ways in which we might apply that. They are not the only ways, obviously, in which we might apply that. Just some ideas. So in terms of communicating effectively, probably many of you have seen this literature, but it's always a good place to start. Messaging matters. We've seen a lot of that around how we motivate people to change their lifestyles. Human beings are very inclined toward comfort, right? Our preference is to live well, live easy, like most animals, in effect, do what we have to do, survive, and then relax. So if you're asking a human being to do something that's out of its comfort zone or that's additive, you want to be sure that they understand what it's about and why it's important to them. Certainly in relation to climate catastrophes, messaging and communication gains more traction when it is highly compelling and very clear and straightforward. So if someone talks to me about salmon in Alaska, that wakes me up, right? However, if someone talks to you about salmon in Alaska, I'll just generalize, it's potentially a very remote sort of concern or problem. It doesn't create the same kind of emotional response or real awareness. So we want to be sure, I mean, all politics are local. So we want to be sure that when we are messaging, we make sure to put what we're saying in context. I know we know this. It's hard to do. I think that requires and as it should, inclusivity. I shouldn't be creating the messages. I might understand messaging in certain environments, but certainly there are lots of parts of the world where other people are closer to the heart of the concern and motivation than I am. There's also a lot of uncertainty around climate change. And what psychological science has shown is that, and we know this, anxiety tends to be immobilizing for human beings. Like if we're so worried about what may happen, we very often prefer to stay in place. So giving people small forward steps rather than too much of a big picture where they end up asking, what now? Where do I fit? And how do I get started? Will be more effective. So encourage small action, remind people that one step, even in the midst of a lot of uncertainty, is much more productive than no steps. So an example, and it's interesting because we see a lot of climate messaging, much of which I would say does not align well with the psychological literature. So plastic takes 500 years to decompose. It's implicit, I shouldn't use plastic. It doesn't tell me what I should do instead of using plastic, when most everything at the local store where I can go shopping is packaged in plastic, for example. So communicate around solutions. That's how you get people engaged. That's how you get them moving forward. Similarly, climate action now, I'm all for it. But if I said to all of you, let's go, the reaction is, where? Right? What? And that's this kind of like climate action now says, go, do something. What? Finally, wake up. Your choices affect climate change. I don't understand the question mark. I think that's a period. But when you convey fear, it tends to increase anxiety and doesn't actually tend to create long-term behavior change. There are ways to think about changing our behavior that are proactive. What should I do? How might I do it? What can I do that we can, and to take a small first step? This is one example. This is very Western based. Again, the highly developed parts of the world are also the ones that are consuming the most energy and creating the most damage. But you can take it's providing a menu of options. What works for me? I said to my partner, you know, if you ate a plant-based diet, he's a chemical engineer who does renewable energy. If you stopped eating meat, you could help the climate a lot. And he said, no way. I am not, right? And so, all right, continuing conversation. The point being that there are other things. I don't own a car, right? We don't own cars, which in many parts of the world isn't that unusual. In the United States, it's very unusual. We ride a bike everywhere we go. So what works? That I think is the critical messaging statement we need to make. Here's some options. Here's what you can do, and this will have an impact. So communicate and educate. Many of the reasons, according to our own science, that people don't get involved actively in climate change have to do with the challenges associated with connecting our day-to-day behaviors with energy consumption and carbon emissions. So you're all wearing clothes. That's a good thing, I guess. I mean, I think we're in a professional meeting. So, but how many of us have asked ourselves, like, well, how much is the fact that I have a pair of shoes and a dress or pants? What does that mean in the context of climate? Because actually, and there's been a lot of publicity around this recently, clothes manufacturing makes a significant contribution to the climate crisis, both in terms of production, in terms of waste and trash, and other shipping and water costs. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But perhaps if people understood this better, they would be more inclined to wear the same clothes longer, to have them mended, to buy something that will last longer rather than something that's less expensive, but will have a very short lifespan. Additionally, people very often don't understand what we do that's unsustainable because it tends to be very broad. Climate action, drive less. Okay, what does drive less mean to each of you? It could mean I'm not going to drive on Saturdays. It could mean I'm getting rid of my car, even though in parts of the United States to go, 5 miles could take 90 minutes on 3 different buses, right? Which would otherwise be a 5-minute trip. So people really need to be able to pair what they do with its impact. Very often, if you ask someone, well, do you go clothes shopping? A lot. Do you have a full closet? Something of that sort. The response will be, yeah, but not that much. What's a comparative metric? People understand how much they're consuming relative to its actual damage. Or sure, I have a car, but it's a very tiny car and I don't use it a lot, but what does that mean? And even if people say, all right, so my car is not a great option, to be perfectly honest, for me to figure out the bus and train system in Washington, D.C., where I'm living right now, to go any length of distance was a major kind of engagement activity. There aren't a lot of direct routes. It's not that simple. So now we have options where meetings are hybrid. Before that wasn't so much. So if we want to opt out of one air flight annually, which has a significant contribution, we can do that. It wasn't necessarily available in the past. I'm going to give you a quick example about educating, which is about composting, because I think that we stop where something makes sense to us, or that's what the science shows, instead of getting psychology helping individuals walk through the entire process of what our behaviors mean. So I eat a plant-based diet because, right? And in my mind, this is the truth. I learned something very recently that if I'm eating a plant-based diet, my food isn't packaged, not plastic, not paper. I'm taking home fruit, vegetables, those kinds of things. Ergo, I'm being very kind to the environment. However, if the average individual from a developed country or highly resourced country throws out about almost half a pound of material waste daily. That is like food waste. What happens when you throw out food waste? Even if it's orange peels, carrot, stems, that kind of thing, I throw that out. In my particular trash collection part of the city, it goes into a plastic bag, unlike this one. It goes into a plastic bag. So a great big truck comes, picks it up. That great big truck then drives way out of town to leave that in a landfill, dumps it. There are so many costs associated with my half a pound of orange peel a day, which ends up to, almost 3 pounds a week. That'd be like 1.5 kilos. That there's the energy from that particular truck, which is those are huge. They're great big gas guzzlers. It's in a plastic bag. In landfills, we spread trash out like horizontally so that it can be buried and kind of decompose, layered in a more effective way. If you compost, however, that weight, the added weight, does not go into a truck and then to plastic or plastic truck, landfill. It's just turned into soil, which actually creates more water, and the way it's layered reduces the methane gas output. Landfills are known for methane output. Long story short, we can talk about the details a lot, but the point is, I thought I had arrived, right? I am not buying any packaged food. The truth is, there's another step there, which then, at least in the United States or in big cities in the United States, is a real challenge. I live in an apartment that's about the size of this stand. If I want to compost, I have to and just turn in my food waste. I can only do that at the farmer's market on Saturdays between 12 and 4 from May till November. Then there's no more, right? And so pretty soon it turns into an entire kind of event to try to compost, which is a policy question that we'll get to. But just in terms of learning and really helping us think through, I don't drive. Does that necessarily mean that I'm a climate friendly person, that I'm doing what I can in terms of climate action, particularly in psychological science? I challenge you to ask yourself that question. I would have to say no to myself. I'd have to call myself on, like, there's a lot more I can do. So communicate, educate, invite, and include. There's, well, climate is a social justice issue. I don't have to tell you that because I'm sure many of you are experts in that particular subject area, but there's a research base that indicates in societies like the United States and parts of Europe that ethnic minorities do not see themselves as part of the environmental care movement. They would never say that they fit in as environmentalists, nor that being a climate activist is relevant to who they are. That identity processes are driven, slower? Okay. Identity processes are driven, I'll speak more slowly, sorry. That identity is driven by similarity very often. There's also data from Nigeria, Zimbabwe, that shows, and Kenya, that shows that the general consensus is that climate activism is a white, Western, middle class, well-resourced issue. So if the world doesn't see itself as part of this particular challenge, need, problem, then we are going to have less success. We need to be sure that we invite, that we include everyone in our communities, and that we're receptive to what role and contribution in the climate crisis is most sensible to their particular history and experience. There is also literature showing that ethnic minorities and gender, so women in particular, as well as people who are living in poverty across the world, are significantly more concerned about the climate crisis. However, they're less empowered. So they have greater concern because they suffer more significant impacts when there are storms, lack of food, temperatures are excessive, but they have fewer options to address those. So we need to start thinking about both understanding in terms of data and applications, holistic approaches to addressing the climate crisis, taking the socio-political, economic, biological, cultural, systems and individual kind of approach. I don't know if any of you have read about Paula Kahumbu. If not, she's incredible. But she's started a program in Kenya, where she's from, that in effect, I was thinking about a way to summarize this, turns conservationist. So, and she looks throughout her country region, people who are doing good things for animals, ergo for the environment, habitat, their food sources, and turns them into, well, they are, but highlights them as heroes. I think of it almost as reality TV, but like climate hero reality TV, much better than any of the reality TV we have in the United States, certainly, so that children, families, government officials can see the kind of work that these particular individuals are doing in the interests of caring for animals, the environment, and alleviating the climate. That is an excellent way to bring people in and to help garner acknowledgement for people that the world hasn't been paying attention to, but are doing extraordinary things. Advocate, advocate, advocate. You know, the United Nations has actually been working on climate policy for 50 years. And we're still working on it. I was at COP26 last year, which was recognized as, at best, a moderate success. At worst, completely unsuccessful. That, you know, there's a lot of talk, and this is the nature of politics, and not a lot of action. As someone who previously worked as a health advisor in the United States Senate, I can say the process is complicated. The politics are problematic, but the policy is what we really need to focus on and understand that policy change occurs, whether it's at the United Nations and the Global Psychology Alliance, which brings in these leaders from 70 and anyone from any psychologically oriented organization across the world, whether it's a national, regional, or international organization, is invited to join, has come together to bring psychological science into policy at the UN in New York, in Geneva. We sent representatives to Scotland last year and to Egypt this year, where we have a side event to talk about mental health, psychological science, and climate. And if any of you have applied for a United Nations event, I'll just highlight here, we have categories. There are agriculture, energy, business. The closest thing to psychology is nutrition. There is nothing, there's not a category that says social sciences, behavioral sciences, psychology. We had to submit our proposal under nutrition. Think about that. We need to be at the table. We're knocking on those doors. It is really about showing up over and over again, understanding that compromises are significant, generally not particularly easy, but they are part of the process. So we should try to have big goals and reasonable expectations along the way. Numbers matter. I'll just say, if I walked into a major government building anywhere in the world, I'm Amanda Clinton. Hi, I'm from Alaska, and I'm really concerned about the climate. Unless it is an extraordinarily unique governmental system, nobody cares. I am one person from the end of the world, and so what, right? If I'm from Alaska and I even go into the United States Senate to a California office, they don't care. I don't vote in California, I vote in Alaska, right? But if all of you show up, whenever we say we have 70 psychological associations, 70 at COP26 in Glasgow, we met the Japanese Minister of Foreign Affairs. We had a chance to talk with the Nepalese health minister, et cetera, not when one of us showed up, but when there was understanding that there was a lot of interest worldwide on this issue. I would say policy really shouldn't create space for enemies and friends. The bottom line is to stay mission focused and issue focused. When you work in policy, you're going to meet a lot of people that you think you really never imagine yourself having a conversation with. Perhaps less so in places like the United Nations, more so in places like the US Congress. But it's not about whether or not I like so-and-so. It's really about finding a space where we have some agreement. And sometimes that means stepping back a lot. But finding a place, if I want my family to be healthy and they want their family to be healthy, the way they interpret that is private healthcare. And the way I interpret that is public healthcare, then step all the way back to we love our families, right? Care about the environment. So communicate, educate, invite and include, advocate and associate, which was the best word I could come up for our organizations. Bring colleagues together. The Global Psychology Alliance is relatively informal. It's a very horizontal leadership approach, but we meet weekly, and our initial meeting was to create change on issues that were too big for any one association to create an impact on alone. And we selected the Sustainable Development Goal 13. So it was climate action. And we have been working on that now for 3 years. Sometimes it's at an in-country level, more grassroots. If someone at the UN, for example, a mission at the United Nations recently said they want to do a climate health resolution on the United Nations floor, what suggestions does psychology have? Well, those go to our Mexican representative to share with that particular mission. Sometimes it's actually with the president of the General Assembly or those kinds of things, but it's really working at all levels consecutively and developing shared initiatives, which I'm sure you know, but can be challenging because we have 70 countries that come together to create a step forward on climate. If we are going to send representatives to a United Nations climate meeting, what is our message? Where can we agree, even though we're from very different parts of the world? So this is just one example. I mentioned the Global Psychology Alliance, which has representatives from all over the world, and we make a point of reaching out and being inclusive. If historically, if the Global South has not been invited to the conversation, it's reasonable that, bless you, that their leadership doesn't anticipate that happening. So we need to extend an invitation. The Global Psychology Alliance has done everything from a series of side events at United Nations meetings to in-country meetings to writing a book about organizational approaches across the world on climate psychology. And we're now part of, and if this initiative is of any interest to you all, to COP Squared, which is a social climate effort at a global level, but this is focused on anyone involved in mental health at any level. Social climate, well-being, not clinical mental health, but the human experience and climate across the world. We're organized into hubs like the World Health Organization, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with the hub lead for your region if you so desire. So join, lead, create a group, get started, participate, and make a commitment. This is a long haul. When I first got my job in the US Senate, I was really excited. I was like, yes, we're going to change mental health in America. And my supervisor was a lovely person, was kind of like, well, I appreciate the energy. I want to remind you, it took us 10 years to write an amendment and for parity, for equality between physical and mental health care in the United States. That said, I was there just a couple of years and we passed the biggest mental health reform law now that have been passed in the United States in 20 years. It's possible, right? It is possible. So it could take you 10 years, could take you 2 years, it could take you the rest of your life. But, you know, we're psychologists. This is what we do, right? This is who we are. We contribute to positive change. So communicate, educate, invite, advocate, associate. If you're interested in the scientific literature that I summarized or this particular PowerPoint, just let me know. I'm happy to send it to you. And as a final example, for any of you who own a pair or up to 7 pairs of jeans, which is suggested as the number of jeans that any one person should own by the fashion design industry. Things we don't think about. There are approximately 5 billion pairs of jeans produced and sold in the world annually. 1 pair of jeans takes up about 1.25 square meters of space. So if we took those 5 billion that you, I, my colleagues, someone on the street had purchased in 2022 and laid those out, we could cover the city of New York 5 times. So you'd have 5 layers, right? At Cairo, 1.5, Tokyo twice, Rome 3 times, Sao Paulo 3 times. It's a lot. What goes in to making a pair of jeans? It takes about 11,000 liters of water to produce 6 pairs of jeans, which is enough water to fill a swimming pool. So any of you who owns 6 pairs of jeans or in your household, that's the amount of water alone that's been required to produce those. It takes water to grow cotton, about 2,500 liters. It takes about 5,000 liters to turn cotton into thread, into jeans. It takes another 56 liters to get those into cargo and across the world, wherever they go, truck them to stores, and then sell them on the rack. So to be honest, last time I thought about whether my jeans were made of cotton or another fabric was a long time ago. Like, if we start thinking about the process of me buying an orange at my market and saying like, yes, good job, Amanda. There's no paper, there's no plastic here, but I toss it into the landfill, right? There's a lot here, but psychology can explain to us how we can take our first steps, what our options are, ways of uniting with individuals who are like or not that much like us, but like-minded in terms of climate, utilize our organizational powers, and they are great, to bring together psychologists from all over the world and keep learning, advocating, taking action, teaching ourselves, teaching others, and sharing that information to create real change in the world, to build that bridge and to move across it together. So I'm going to close just by asking you, maybe as a start of a conversation, what action can you take today to address the climate crisis? And what action can you take, additional action? So this is 2 within a week of your return home. Thank you for your time, and looking forward to questions.
Thank you, Amanda. Now we will hear Bill. He has some notes about this keynote. So if you can start.
Thank you very much. Here's your white activist. I'm an activist from FFF, and I will say a few. I have some comments about activism, and I would just first like to make a few comments about I think the wonderful things that you did say about first of all, the community psychologists are in the best place of the psychologists, and maybe many others. And I will get into this in the second part of my little speech. But I think that is really something to stress. And the second thing to distress is the bridges. You mentioned all the bridges, and I think they're great. those are the tools. We really need them. And they're not the only tools, but they are very important tools. And we should certainly take advantage of the 5 tools that you illustrated. The last thing I would like to comment is about the contribution of the CO2 emissions. You showed a slide that had the current level of emissions. I didn't get the actual year, but more or less it was the current, if I'm not mistaken. If you would have taken a slide that showed the emissions from, let's say, 1970 or something like 1980, up to, I don't know, a little bit before the Paris Agreement, what you would see is that the great amount of emissions were by developed countries, okay? And the US, Europe, and the other developed countries, Japan, and so on. So this is a tremendous conflict because we, the developed countries, have essentially created the climate problem. And so asking the developing countries to pay the full amount of the problem that we've largely created is one of the big conflicts, and one of the reasons, of course, you said that the white activist is seen with a little bit of diffidence, and I think this is the source of diffidence. So what I would like to do, I would basically like to make 2 important points. One has to do with, I'm certain that our speaker shares, is the urgency of the problem, okay? And then the other point, another area that I want to get into is what community psychologists can do, okay? We have known well about man's warning of climate since the 1980s. Exxon, the largest I guess, world petroleum company, own scientists warned that man was dangerously warming the climate in 1982, 40 years ago. So unfortunately, in about 1987, several years after that, Exxon's management began to campaign to cast doubt on climate science, publicly deriding the type of work of its own scientists. Exxon reportedly funded 39 organizations that misrepresented science by outright denial or by overstating the uncertainties of climate change. I think big oil, gas, and coal have the major responsibility for the climate crisis. However, this is something we need to remember. We are all involved. The oil industry, with the invention of gasoline, made possible the automobile industry. This was tied to the highway systems that we built in our countries, and also the way that we view the city. I mean, I don't want you to think of the only possibility as Los Angeles, but Los Angeles is certainly a city that it was ruined by, it was made less effective in its transportation by the automobile and by the emphasis on bringing the highway into the city and having this kind of concept. And we, as consumers, bought the car as a means of freedom of movement. We could go anywhere. Great. It also became a status symbol, a common way to show how much one was worth. So we are, and we were, tied to oil in many different ways. And that's one of the reasons it's very difficult and problematic to change. Now, in case you're wondering where the carbon emissions are and the greenhouse gases are going, they're still going up. The global industry-related carbon emissions rose by 6% last year in 2021 to 36 billion tons of carbon and carbon dioxide. This is the highest level ever. And we're actually recovering from the COVID crisis. And a lot of that growth has even been accompanied by more coal. And as you know, we have the problem of the oil prices due to the war in Ukraine. And another, just a note I would like to give is that air pollution is related to climate, but air pollution from fuel energy sources contributes to at least 4.2, if not more, deaths per year, increased in deaths in expected in premature deaths per year. If you compare that to the COVID crisis, we're talking about a bit of a COVID price every year due to the pollution of fossil fuels. And I would like to get also to the Paris Agreement, which is a major agreement announced in the same year, of course. But according to the latest emissions gap report this year, we must reach the peak by 2025. That is, we have to start going down on the CO2 emissions very quickly. So this is the part that I would like to stress about the urgency. And if we don't take steps, we get to a higher and higher, hotter and hotter world. And I don't know if we don't want to really get to a 3.0 increase world. I don't know if any of you have seen there's an excellent video by the economist on this world, and we certainly would like not to go there. And I would like to just comment on one of the essential policy problems of many of these climate treaties, and certainly the Kyoto Agreement, is that we fail to take into consideration the free rider. Okay, that is the person that gets on the bus and doesn't pay the bus ticket. Okay, in climate, what does that mean? That means the nation that doesn't meet their quota, that doesn't meet on the agreed amount of reduction in CO2, and the others naturally benefit from it and pay from it by making their own expensive reduction in emissions. And this is a very serious problem that the Nobel Prize winner Nordhaus has addressed. And together you add this problem of the environmental injustice, the fact that historically we've had this crisis created largely by the developed countries. And you can see that policy is necessary, but it's very difficult at a global level. On the other hand, I would like to stress that Europe has taken an extremely important lead in the Green Plan, the European Green Plan, which is a very comprehensive, very ambitious program that, of course, still has to be in part financed, and still part of it is already going on, of course, but it's a very, very forward-looking and a plan that everybody in the world has certainly looked at and benefited from. The U.S. has just in the last month passed a very ambitious climate plan. It was very, we didn't expect it actually, but it passed, and that is a very much a sign of optimism. So now I would like to turn to the optimistic part. It's very urgent that we do something about climate change and climate warming as soon as possible. And if we don't, we're going to get into really a mess. As you know, you've read you're aware of the history of things that happened Also 2 weeks ago in Italy, we had a flood that we shouldn't have had. So I would like to now turn to the fact that there are a lot of things community psychologists to do. And I would also like to emphasize that climate change should not be viewed in the most strict sense. That is, when people work on the problems of water, of pure water for cities, for example, they're working on climate problems. When people work on food, as you mentioned in your example of food in the U.S., when you're working on climate. When you work in agriculture, you're working on climate change. You may not call it climate change, but you're working on that problem also. So we want to consider climate change in its broadest sense. Okay, that's the first thing. There are many opportunities. The local opportunities are the ones I would like to emphasize, although that doesn't mean that there are not opportunities for community psychology at the regional, national, and international level. The local neighborhood is usually in confusion. Your local neighborhood is usually in confusion. It needs help. It needs, for example, to find green spaces, to create green spaces. I don't know if you know the literature on green spaces, but it's exceptional. What green space, what living near a park, or going into a forest, has all kinds of health benefits in the universe. I mean, it's really really amazing. Community psychologists need to get down and help your neighborhood increase the green spaces, make them better. The second thing you can do is the schools. The schools are a community. You need to get into the schools, apart from the curriculum and the education that is needed. We need to see if the schools can be made more efficient energetically, and if they can produce energy. Why can't more of our schools have solar panels on top of the buildings? And this is an organizational problem. It's not just an administrative problem. It's an organizational problem where clinical psychologists can bring all their skills. Another major concern is climate migration. And I'm not talking about necessarily climate migration between nations, but climate migration within nations. There are some communities that are not going to be able to make it. Some communities in the US and also in Italy are going to face so many climate problems. They get warmer, they have, I don't know, they have more forest fires, they have more climate problems, and people are going to leave them. People are going to abandon these cities and they go to other cities. And so at the city level, the community psychologist has to be there. He has to be there to understand what the options are with regard to climate change. And your public buildings, look at this university building. Okay, this is where you live. A lot of the researchers. It's a beautiful building, but could it have solar panels? Is the conditioning equipment highly efficient? Is the building insulated enough? These are problems that are around you, are surrounding you. So community psychologists, their own faculty, can look at these problems. They can say, okay, we need to do something. And this is true in all public buildings. It's not only homes. It's what we can do in general. And the beautiful thing about energy savings, and if you look at the solutions to the climate problem, there are two big solutions. The big solutions are, on one hand, energy efficiency, and the other hand are the production of clean energy by the use of photovoltaics and and wind industry primarily. Well, there's also a small amount of geothermal energy, but these are the two solutions. And the beautiful thing about energy is that energy is used everywhere. So the opportunity for you to intervene at a planning and understanding the needs is potentially everywhere. And so I would like to, I mean, you have to, for example, at the city level, you have to have the transportation system. You have more bike lanes, more possibilities of walking, improve the bus service. So the whole issue of public transport. And you don't want electrical cars, no, just because they're electrical. You don't want them to repeat necessarily the kind of transport overemphasis we had on our cities, particularly in America, but not only in America, on the car. The cities that work from the point of view of transportation have multiple modes of transportation. They're not based just on the car. They're based on high rail. They're based on subways. They're based on good bus transport, and so on and so forth. So the planning of our cities in the future, and certainly clinical psychologists should be in on this planning at the city level, is a very important matter. And as I mentioned, even at the condominium level, the condominium is a big problem. Nobody likes to get involved in the condominium because of all the conflicts. But working with condominiums, working with other organizations to help solve and to emphasize the energy savings, and not only energy savings, but solar in condominiums is important. And last but not least, I would like to mention working with consumer organizations to better understand some of the key things that she was saying at an individual level, that is reduction of consummation, repair, reuse, recycling. These are all key things that can be promoted through various organizations, consumer organizations, and to help them get to both an individual level and a community level, the maximum efficacy. And so I would like to conclude saying that from the perspective of urgency and the perspective of climate movements, one is either active and with the climate movement or against the climate movement. There's no middle ground. You got to choose. Every community psychologist should take on and contribute to one local climate improvement project. This is a part-time job. This is not your whole job. You want to be connected to youth. You want to be connected to one of the most environment. I mean, I really think that for the community psychologist, environmental change is your friend. And so you should really be involved in one local environmental change project, something that you care for, making it more green, making it, a better transportation system, and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So before giving the word again, I just would like to add a few comments. I will try to be very quick, but just wanted to emphasize that some communities, some countries are already facing climate change for many, many years. So this is not new for them. I think that the global north started to be more aware of the climate issue, of climate injustice in the last years, but many people and many communities are facing environmental degradation, climate change impacts for decades. And this also relates with another point, is that those people, those communities in the global south, they are fighting against climate change. There's plenty of movements, plenty of organizations fighting against environmental big projects for, again, since ever. So when we talk about this idea, and maybe this is just a challenge, a question for you, but when we talk about this idea that minorities are not interested or concerned about environmental issues and climate change as white people, educated people are, I think that probably we need to ask the question differently, is how we include those voices in the way that we think about climate change and environmental issues, because they have been complaining about climate change, even if sometimes they don't use the word climate change, but they have been complaining about environmental injustice and climate injustice forever. So I think that there is a lack of empathy also from our side on how we look at environmental problems and the fights of local communities, especially in the global south. And this again relates with the idea of climate justice and how we think about climate justice. So it's kind of busy word. Everyone's talk about climate change, the climate crisis, climate justice, but what does this actually mean in practice? And I think that community psychology, but not only community psychology, I think that we need to do a better job about how to, in terms of actually creating conditions for climate justice. And this involves creating spaces for participation of minorities, Black communities, migrants communities, for example, but it also involves recognizing those voices and also and hearing those voices truly. And just two other points, small points, I will try to be very quick. Just to remember also when the environmental justice movement started. It started by Black communities in the US, Black and Latino communities. So they have been fighting again for climate change, for environmental health, environmental spaces, green spaces for decades. So this brings me to the point that climate change is a political issue. And I missed this a little bit in your talk, and I wanted to hear you more about this, how this focus on individual action, I think is the easy way to address climate change, is to tell people to change your behaviors. Even if changing behaviors is very hard, but it's easier than changing the political system. It's very, it's just imagining a different political institutions, political life is more complicated. So we started to tell people, let's change how you eat, let's change how you dress. And I think that this is a risk for addressing climate change. I'm not saying that individual climate action is not necessary, especially in the global north. Of course it is, but I think it's the wrong, it's not the wrong message. It's just part of the message. We need to tell also that we need to do collective action. We need to engage in social movements. And there has been some interesting literature saying that actually social movements, the anti-fracking movement, for example, is much more effective than being a vegan. So there is a lot of, in terms of emissions, so stopping a big project has also a lot of implications for less emissions. So my thoughts on this were just how can we increase the attention to climate justice for one side, and on the other side, how we can make climate change as a political issue. And when I say political issue, it's not a left or right issue. It's really about an issue that concerns with power. And there is people that have big companies that have a lot of power, and they are the responsible for climate change. So there is also this idea that human behavior. Okay, we are responsible for climate change, but there is a small group of people in the world that they have a big amount of responsibility as well. And sometimes the focus on individual action and the human impacts on climate change tends to overlook to that aspect. So yeah, those were just random comments, but I would like also to hear you about that.
It doesn't need to, but those were not meant as an individual. Those are I think the larger principles are about messaging. How are we going to share psychological science with our university? So what it utilizes to communicate to students or faculty that then puts in place kind of norms, whether or not, you know, this is how we use, honestly, I was just thinking, I'm sitting here drinking water from, you know, a plastic bottle, or so how we use our resources or our money, or and similarly, so communication, education, really broadly. I think, to be fair, I did use kind of individual examples, but it wasn't meant as an individual initiative. I would say so, first of all, and I want to clarify, I agree with you. And the data show there's more concern from parts of the global South, ethnic minority communities about climate change, that concern is significant, that yeah, it is extremely unjust, but that the spaces, as you were saying, and even inviting someone to the table is very different from listening to what they're saying. And so yeah, I think I don't think there's a disinterest. As a matter of fact, from ethnic minority communities, there's the space doesn't seem as natural, like it was created by another kind of like white, Western, industrialized nation sort of. But so my understanding of the science is that we are a lot better off not to make the climate question political. That actually, I just want to, so that historically, for example, in the United States, in the right around mid 80s, a Republican senator who's now deceased, John McCain, put climate policy forward. President Nixon did in the 70s. It became a political issue, and then it got stuck. I think it is a community, a humanitarian, humanity question. The compost question, what I'm trying to do, for example, in my neighborhood, is get the city to pick up compost, which has a price, and then get everybody to contribute and leave their right. To create systems change takes individual participation. So I'm very interested in systems change. I think that activism is extremely important. What we keep bumping into is it raises awareness without changing our policies, regulations, or individual behaviors. So where, right, one person buying less isn't going to fix the problem. We have to reach out to energy companies or oil producers. I think we have to acknowledge power comes with money, and that where we spend our money does have an impact. If I am not buying cars or gas or clothes, that doesn't matter, honestly. And I do this stuff all the time. Like I will refuse to buy something from Amazon forever because of but they don't care. Like I said, I'm Amanda. Okay, Amanda, don't buy something here. But if we all say we're done, right, with that, or we're gonna have compost in our neighborhood, or then it changes. There is a power in numbers. At political level, they look at us as votes and voices. At a business level, I think it just comes down to money. If I answered your questions, or if anyone else has comments or thoughts.
Yeah, we should probably open the space also for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, comments that you would like to to do. Yeah, I think we still have 10, 15 minutes. So yes, please. So this is for me, the question? Okay. I was not prepared to answer questions. I thought the questions were for Amanda and Bill, but well, I think that there is a bias in how we discuss these issues. And one of them is that the fact that no one from the Global South is in this table, for example, and we are discussing climate change and how community psychology can help to address climate injustice, I would say. Yeah, and that is probably one of the starting points, is to give more space for those voices to be heard, instead of just having the table with the usual people in the table making the decisions. And this is one of the biggest problems with climate change policies, mitigation and adaptation policies. And we actually have some literature saying at the moment that some environmental, some policies that have an intention to address climate change, they are actually intensifying and amplifying climate injustice. And you see that not only in the Global South, but also in countries, for example, Spain. There is some literature on that showing that green gentrification actually happens. And what this does to migrants communities, poor working class families, is just to expel people from their places where they live in the name of one green space, one natural-based solution that will improve it will improve a lot of things. But my point here is that we cannot discuss climate change without considering social justice as the center of climate, social injustice as the center of the discussion. Because otherwise we have this risk of reproducing social injustice that have been with us since ever. So I think that probably that is the most important idea that I would like to share, is the need to bring social justice to the center of the discussion, and also include those voices, not as an invitation, but they should be leading the discussion. Probably that is my that is my opinion. Yes, please.
I mean, we need to finance climate improvements in the developing countries. And the World Bank has proposed, I think, a $200 billion initiative, which is to date has gone more or less empty. I mean, we're not really helping with the financing of major. I mean, the World Bank is doing some, and we contribute to the World Bank, but I think that the problem is that we're not so generous. So, I mean, I think we have to consider the fact that one of the main problems is to finance, get the money for them to make the major protection of their agricultural systems and so forth. And it's not forthcoming, unfortunately.
I would like to say, actually, I agree completely with both these points, but one key effort, and that with the Global Psychology Alliance, has been we did actually reach out. There was a very concrete invitation process, please, but it's join us so that we can hear from you and learn from you. And I mentioned a horizontal leadership framework. I schedule meetings. I don't run meetings. I don't make decisions. And it's not to an adequate degree. I would love ideas and struggle with this and fail in many ways. I think that there are lots of things. I guess I think about it as I've done work in the Mideast, and that there are things that I just don't hear, that none of us really hear until when I'm on education projects with women who want to leave in the middle of the day to make meals for their spouses and children. My reaction to that, my automatic reaction is, what? You don't have to cook for her, right? I mean, that's just, but if I step back and really think about it, and I worry in the United States, I don't know education systems in other parts of the world that well, that we aren't teaching people to pause and try to hear the tree falling in the forest, as it were. If it's making a sound, am I listening for it? And so the Global Psychology Alliance is an attempt to function in that way. Our climate, the climate publication that our New Zealand colleagues publish, but has contributions from everyone in the alliance of every continent in the world who was interested in sharing their organizational efforts that we, I don't know, it's a start. We're trying to kind of like change bigger systems by working this way, learning from each other. We actually, for those of you who are interested, the Polish Psychological Association is part of the Alliance, and there's a special issue on climate coming out that we specifically, our editors are from the Philippines and from Nicaragua, and even because I was in the prior presentation where there's a language challenge, and we've decided to do is to fund translation so that people can write in their own language and their own, which is often a big barrier. But if we really want to be inclusive, how can we bring people in, listen to what they have to say, acknowledge strength and differences? Maybe I should learn to cook for the people I love in my life, right? It's a very small example, but just kind of being able to step back, I think, from what we typically do and rethink it. Yeah, I agree 100% that, and I just think it's multi-layered. And we have to really reach out, from individual to community to country, and we have to reach out to other psychologists, engineers, teachers, that there's an endless, if there's a call to action, there's an awful lot one of us can do, or two of us, to make that group bigger and elevate the science of psychology, community psychology in action in particular, and this, and climate, and having people who made the problem fix it. The people who are suffering from the problems that the people made. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, well said. Yes. And there is also another question.
As we know already everything, so science is there. Bill already mentioned that there's the new report of the Club of Rome, which is kind of, again, saying, well, we said it's the question is, what do we do as community psychologists? What is our knowledge and as psychologists and such? So why don't we teach students to build communities, build networks, to protest against fracking in the West, to build networks to go out, how to develop communities, how to engage communities, and be engaged by themselves in their universities, in their communities, why don't we teach that? Because we have the knowledge. We don't have to write journals or something like that. That's okay if we do. And it's raising awareness. Right? But why don't we go into action? That's what career psychology is about.
Thank you. I think that we should probably collect all the questions. There was one there, and then Sarah, yes, and then yeah, please. Sorry? To do that. Thank you. Sardar, do you want to add your question? Yes? Yes. Thank you. There were another question, and then, no? Okay. I think that we can now discuss all the three. You can start.
So yeah, those examples, and I'm sure that is a specific example within a broader system of agriculture, manufacturing, transportation, energy usage, and human, Any examples are actually not individual examples. They're examples of how, and then we participate in a system, which actually is part of what we want to think about when we're thinking about communities. Any activism we take should be based on all of these points. The problem is significant enough that the example I brought, which I selected because I wanted it to be generally relevant, but is not about a pair of jeans. It is about a system of manufacturing, agriculture, transportation, consumption, energy usage, all of those pieces and how they fit together. And I think the bigger point here is that yes, activism is required. We need to bring people together. What happens when you organize people and they don't start to see specific outcomes, or they don't know what their concrete steps are, is that there tends to be fallout, and the motivation decreases and the participation is reduced. And so a climate march is the very first step, or a protest against the way in which military actions contribute to the climate crisis. So I don't see any of these as mutually exclusive. I think that they're all parts of this bigger solution, where absolutely it needs to be about large numbers of people taking meaningful action and raising voices. But when voices die down, then what happens? Then what are we trying to, where's the change that we're trying to lead for? If we educate, again, in a broader kind of way, it's about thinking about what I do, what the people around me do, what the people who are making decisions where I live mandate, and connecting all of those dots. I mean, I really like the bridge, because I think that all those pieces have to go together. You know, ultimately, community psychology is about that bridge, but it's also about the building blocks to get there.
Yeah. For me.
Yes. Well, first, Wolfgang, thank you for the question. I certainly agree that the actions are really needed and are an opportunity for the community psychologists. I think that sharing similar actions, sharing the results of similar actions, or, for example, all the ones that are engaged in increasing green spaces, okay, they may have some common problems, and they may have, so I think there is for the development, for the ideas that you suggested, trying to build on different ways of increasing the effectiveness of for the psychologist to affront specific situations in his community. And the idea of studying why is the environment being destroyed, I think is very interesting. I'm writing a little bit on this subject, and I think it has a lot to do with the male oppression. The fact that males tend to oppress they want to get their own way, and unfortunately the alpha males have been in charge of our economic elite, have gone down the history, have gone down the story that they've gone down, and those are the people, and the kind of mechanism that we're fighting is one of oppression, in my agree, and male oppression, male oppression of other males, other females. And it's clear by the military experience that was cited earlier. I mean, we're not, you know, why does the United States have to have a military budget that is equivalent to the first 6 other countries? And it's, you know, it's because the males believe that we should be heroes, and we warlike. We should win battles. That's part of the male oppressive behavior.
Just one final comment in terms of policy action, the research. You know, this is in South Korea, but it serves perhaps as a potential model. They have done a significant amount of research on green spaces, nature therapy, and that psychological science is now part of the Korean Forestry Service national policy that integrating youth and green spaces, creating more green spaces and utilizing that for physical and mental well-being. So there are, I think, some really interesting models that might be worth referring to. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that we have to finish, but maybe just saying that I think that we all agree that climate change is changing everything and will demand that we change also everything at all the levels and all the systems. So it's not only the micro, the individual, but also the political, the institutions, the economic system, capitalism that we didn't mention here, but it should be also mentioned in this kind of discussions. So thank you, Amanda, for your talk. Thank you, Will, for your comments, and thank you all for your questions and comments. And I hope that we keep discussing these issues afterwards. Thank you.